Greetings, I'm DK Rosner. This is TTT Live Online. The Ministry of Education is hosting a press conference addressing the physical return to school of students and the teachers. Now, we're having a conversation before that, along with a wrap-up at the end of it. And we are very happy to have Dr. Khatija Khan. She is joining us virtually. Dr. Khan is a clinical psychologist and neuropsychologist, and she's a lecturer at the Faculty of Medical Sciences, UWI, a member of the UE COVID-19 Task Force, past president of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists, and we're once again very happy to have you join us, Dr. Khan. And in studio with us, we have Mr. Roland Seeley. He's an executive member of TATE, the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Teacher Educators. Now, Roland Seeley is an instructor of pre-service teachers in literacy at the undergraduate level and pedagogical principles at the postgraduate level. And I already said that we're going to be diving into that a little deeper. But together we hope to set a fulsome stage for some of the issues that need to be addressed that takes us back to school in a manner that benefits us all to the greatest degree. So I want to start off asking, what is the most pressing issue for you in this return to school? I'll start with you, please, Mr. Seeley.
Okay, the most pressing issue would be learning loss and learning recovery. And I imagine that's the most pressing on the minds of everybody. How are we going to make up, to catch up? Because admittedly, there was a measure of learning loss. And so for all educators, not just in Trinidad, but across the world, that has been the concern, the major concern. How do we make up for the loss? Learning loss is not new. During the August vacation, students suffer learning loss when they come back out to school in September. And so imagine this extended kind of period of no learning and no teaching taking place for many students. I think the major concern would be learning loss, and also added to that, health and safety, not just physical health, but mental and emotional health. So those are some of the issues that has caught our attention as teacher educators.
I think sometimes even you're working somewhere and you have some time off, vacation or whatever, and you come back and there may be things that have changed during that period. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you need to become a little more up to par with that. But I want to ask you the same question, please, Dr. Khan. Also, though, I'll put a little caveat in that question of what are your most pressing issues in this return to school, in the sense that someone said learning loss happens, like you just said, Mr. Seeley, but sometimes what is more important is that the character of that individual is built, and on top of that, learning in terms of the academia, the curricula can be taught, but it is very important to have those social skills to build that person, to build their character. But the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, DK. Thank you for having me. Good morning also to Dr. Seeley and all of your viewers and listeners joining in. So first, if we could start off by saying, this reopening is a positive thing. It's been long awaited and it's a welcome step after all of this time. And certainly, there have been frameworks to guide the reopening of schools existing since 2020. So for the past 2 years, organizations like UNICEF, UNESCO, etc., have put out guidelines for that transition, for the reopening. And what you'll find in all of these guidelines, one of the things that have been emphasized is the mental and psychosocial well-being, both of students and teachers. So I think that's where I would want to start with what I think needs to be a key component of all of the discussions addressing all of the issues that pertain to reopening. So certainly learning loss is one of them, but how do we achieve that? How do we address that? What we have seen is, unlike the annual break for July, August holidays, or even, your Christmas break, your Easter break, etc., we have had children away from school for 2 years, and that has had a significant impact. So how this transition, this adjustment, this re-entering of schools is handled is going to be important. So we know that it has had a significant psychological impact, as I said, both on teachers and on students. And this is very variable. People have been affected in different ways. Some children have had the buffers. They've had supportive home environments. They've had access to the digital devices they need, etc. But we know this has not been the case uniformly across the board. So I think identifying where these vulnerabilities lie, what gaps might exist across the diverse student body population is going to be really important. You mentioned also that social aspect. And so we know that socio-emotional development is a critical component at the developmental stage for children, both at the primary and secondary school levels. We know that children over these 2 years would have felt lonely and isolated. And some of them may have been affected even more, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, a host of other mental health challenges. So I think understanding this and understanding that there has been a very significant and tangible psychological impact, an impact on well-being, and how do we address that going back into school? So it can't be a rush to business as usual. It has to be, how do we factor these things in to ensure that if we want to make sure that they're in the right place to continue with their learning, we need to make sure that that mental well-being is there. So I'm going to pause there. I'm sure we'll be able to talk about, what that involves. What are some of those strategies that need to be considered as well?
Thank you. It makes me want to ask, what is business as usual? But it seems as though you had a point there, Mr. C.
Yes, I just want to interject here that although learning loss is the focus of educators, we also have to factor in learning gains, because the 2 years wasn't a total loss. Schooling stopped. Schooling was disrupted, but the education did not stop. The formal education did, but the continuous education didn't. And so we have to also factor in, what did the students gain during this time? And we would admit that people gained a lot of things, farming skills, cooking skills, a lot of things happened during this time. So we also have to factor in the return, the gains that students made during this period as well.
And that is something I wanted to ask about, in the sense that there may be some people who don't necessarily want to go back to physical school. So Dr. Khan would have just spoken about frameworks, and there were some individuals who may have had those secure frameworks. The situation at home or under their caregivers was as such that they felt safe, they felt warmth, they felt loved. They thrived in that environment. They were able to upload their stuff, be able to work asynchronous. When they're ready to take a small break, they do that, but it's not as though this is at the expense of their education. So how do we carry that back, or some of those tenets, those factors, back into the physical classroom, especially when we're seeing a rise, anecdotally on my part, but I'm sure there's some information to back it up, the rise of people interested in homeschooling and saying, okay, well, this allows us to be a little more flexible, stay out of the traffic that is coming, and still move forward. So it's not as though you're losing anything in terms of being able to say, okay, well, I understand these concepts, I have competence along these lines.
Yeah, so, the mantra on the lips of many people, business, finance, health, is what have we learned from COVID? And we have to see that, understand some of the things we've learned from COVID. And one of the things that we have learned is that education can take place in many different ways. And I think from the level of the classroom, the teacher has to be flexible. It is business as usual, but it's not as usual. It is continuing of education, but it is not the way that we were accustomed to. And that flexibility has to be built in the restart, built in the return. We have to be flexible. We recognize that the learning, the way students learn differed. But before we may have overlooked your particular style of learning, but now we can't, because we were forced to recognize that there are different ways people learn. And so that the lessons that we can learn from COVID is that education doesn't have to stop when there's a disruption in the society. Education can continue, and it can continue in many different ways.
And I really appreciate the fact that both you and Dr. Khan are talking about the fact that education has continued in different ways. And because even the point of learning things through cooking, learning things through farming, and helping to bring the knowledge into a manner that is a lot more tangible, as opposed to saying, okay, well, it makes sense and I have it in my school book, as opposed to see directly how it plays out in life. But Dr. Khan, let me bring you back in, please. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to hearing to seeing a little later in the press conference, especially looking at the mental aspects of individuals. And I say individuals because we're talking about both teachers as well as students and everyone involved.
So I think, DK, just in terms of consideration of all the stakeholders having a part to play, so that the schools and the teachers are coming up with plans about what that re-entering, what that adjustment would look like. Because I think one of the key words there would also be flexibility. So I think schools may want to be able to make decisions for their own populations based on the experience they've had over the past 2 years. So for some schools where you've had children who there's been good attendance, good engagement, so they kind of up to date with what has been happening with children over the past 2 years, that school would have a different experience than a school where you've had a lot of absenteeism and you're not quite sure what's been going on with children over the past 2 years. Or where you have teachers with different views related to the actual school site. So I think in terms of having that leeway for those discussions to be had so that we have all stakeholders on board with what a safe and healthy reopening and a successful reopening and transition would look like. Just to circle back, if I may, I like the concept of appreciating the learning gains as well. So certainly learning has taken place in so many different ways. And what I would also like to see incorporated is that we continue to see how those can be inculcated into the curriculum. So for example, I have contemporaries who don't know how to set up a Google Doc and share it and edit it, etc. But we have so many of our kids now at the primary school level who are quite savvy at doing those things because of the experience they've had over the 2 years. So how do we continue to explore all these new ways into their ongoing education? I think flexibility is going to be one of the key words also in terms of responding to children and the different needs that are identified. So I think these coming few weeks is going to require perhaps some flexibility to change up some of the routines. So for example, children might need more school breaks, longer lunches, more time to play and interact with their peers rather than only being in the classroom. So I think some of that I'd like to see incorporated about the need or emphasizing that need that we need to ensure that in addition to their physical safety, that the mental and psychosocial well-being of both teachers and students are going to be critical for this adjustment period coming up.
I don't know if we pass a collection plate, you might put something into it, Mrs. Celia. So you're nodding and agreeing.
Yeah. Dr. Khan mentioned that during the coming weeks, and it cannot be a rushed restart. It has to be phased because there are key things that has to happen before we pick back up the curriculum.
Things like what?
Well, for pre-assessment and reassessment of students. Students are coming back in, having lost some kind of knowledge that they would have had. They would be behind in the curriculum in some ways because of the lack of devices and so on. So we have to revisit this whole concept of differentiated instruction. That's where students are met, the knowledge that is in the head of the teacher is accessible to the students. And so it's packaged in a way that everybody gets it. And so reassessment has to take place, assessing students as they re-enter schools so that we can level the instruction to meet their needs and meet them where they are. So the re-entry has to be a phased re-entry.
And in terms of that phased re-entry, I know one of the things that happens after normal restart to school in terms of like after some vacation, there's a question, write an essay about your time. Your August holidays or this or that. What are some of those things that Tate would like to see teachers coming with? Because if you ask certain students to write an essay about their time or the past 2 years, they're going to tell you that an immediate family member would have transitioned. There's grief, there's loss to deal with.
Yeah.
So what are some of those things that hopefully should be put in place to help build the toolkit of educators and put it into the framework of things going forward? And I'll ask both of you that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think Dr. Khan may be better suited to because that writing of the essay was like a release, you know, and in this case it will serve that kind of psychosocial kind of release, you know. But teachers, we have to understand as well, teachers went through the same thing the students went through.
Which is part of the reason I asked.
Yeah, so they would have suffered loss, they would have grieved, they would have suffered loss of incomes in some cases. And so they have to write the essay too. And they have to participate in that healing, because it requires some kind of release of self and you know examining those kinds of issues. What I would like to see teachers do, and you keep referring to their toolbox, I refer to it as their toolkit, same thing. But what I would like to see them do is be more active in action research, doing research in your classroom, examining what is needed for your classroom, what is needed for your community, your learning community. And teachers can learn that, how to carry out action research so that it informs their practice going forward. So it's not just picking back up. It is trying to see what these students that are in front of me, what do they need? What can I do to meet those needs? So I will encourage action research as soon as we get back out. So teachers participate in that.
You have no choice, Mr. Seeley, because you're looking at pedagogical principles. But Dr. Khan, what are some of those things? Because even if we look at that symbolic writing of that essay, dealing with the issues, the grief that may occur in the classroom that is shared, what are some of your suggestions about how we get through this phased opening or this opening?
Thanks again. So as I was mentioning before, I think it's going to call for a lot of flexibility. And if we look on the part, let me start on the part of teachers. So indeed, teachers have also experienced this pandemic and also will have to go through this period of adjustment. So I think there also needs to be support for teachers for that. So whether it's more training, more checking in, more support in terms of whether it's actual resources or psychosocial support in terms of helping them navigate what they're going through in these next upcoming months. I think it would also call on teachers. So there is the essay, right? And we all know this, how I spent my Christmas vacation, how I spent my Easter vacation essays, but what do we do with them? So when we look at the content of those, how do we address that in the classroom? And I'll broaden that concept in terms of monitoring and recognizing what you're seeing and how we label those behaviors. So there's a principle in juvenile justice where they talk about, instead of asking what's wrong with a child, we ask what's happening with this child. So same thing, we've had children away from schools for 2 years. So some of those, even those attributes, sitting quietly in your seat, classroom rules, classroom management, and classroom behaviors, they're going to need some readjusting to that. They've lacked that routine and structure for the past two years. So I think teachers should look out for behaviors that should be contextualized in that perhaps children need a little more encouragement, a little more of a reminder, a little more reinforcement, rather than perhaps seeing behaviors as bad behavior, etc. And the only way you can do that is if you're managing your own stress levels, because if you are frustrated and overwhelmed, then that's also going to reflect on how you interact with children. So I think support here is also a key word, support for our educators, for support for our school administrators, so they're in the right mindset. They have the right tools in their toolkit and the right support system around them to help children navigate this period coming up. Yeah? And with respect to the actual delivery, I mean, I myself as an educator, albeit in the tertiary education system, I've found that something I do more of consistently now, and I plan to continue even when we resume face-to-face, is checking in with my students and with my learners. So it's sort of asking about the essay, but it's more on a regular basis. How are you doing today? What's going on? And using those responses it helps me to figure out what's the best way to interact in the classroom, in that lesson at that moment in time. Because if you have students who are dealing with things and we don't know, then we might not know how to attribute that behavior. So do they need some reinforcement of some kind, some support of some kind? Do I need to reach out to a parent? Do I need to get them some additional support? What is causing this behavior that I'm seeing? So I think navigating those, identifying who are the students who have vulnerabilities, who are the students who need remediation of different kind. That's going to be a key component. Dr. Seeley mentioned it when he spoke about the assessment, the reassessment, etc.
I'm latching onto some things and using them as reference points. So how do we use that essay and get the information from that to inform how we treat with that specific individual, as opposed to saying, okay, well, this is the general lessons plan and everybody's going to get it the same way? Because I think we can all agree that that kind of broad brush application will be a little less than ideal in this circumstance.
Yeah, you know, what every teacher wants in a classroom is the complete engagement of the student. That's what every teacher wants. That's the ideal, but that you don't always get that ideal, you know. But the focus has to be student engagement. What can I do to ensure that this individual student, not the class, but this student is engaged? So there should be a greater focus on individuality in the classroom, stressing the whole concept of individuality, but also the individual being a part of a learning community. So you are encouraging individuality in the classroom, but you are also encouraging community. And I'm stressing community because recognizing that you're part of a community lends itself to a greater understanding of social and emotional learning. And that is something that has to happen going forward. So the introduction of social and emotional learning, students becoming aware of their emotions and recognizing it, understanding it, being able to label it, express it in a way that is beneficial to the community, and regulating those emotions as well. So those are some key things. Even before we begin to talk about 1+1, we have to re-engage the students and ensure that student engagement is part of the learning community.
And part of the reason that I ask is because I can see I don't want to write the essay. I'm in class. I'm going to, here what now, I'm going to make a ruckus. We're going to disrupt this, mash up the Dolly house. Nobody else going to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So, but that learning community that I hear you speaking to that often, it begs the question, what is school now? Because I think these kind of existential questions now, in terms of like, where does education happen? What is school? How do we deal with these new narratives and ways that we find ourselves being? So what are some of those things that, because I keep on trying to ask for things, incremental steps or things to help itemize or recognize or say, well, this is what this learning community is. So what are some of those things that we should be thinking about?
Well, we should look out for, well, Dr. Khan mentioned it, we should look out for student behaviors, how students are relating to each other, because the social aspect of school, and school serves that purpose as well, the social aspect of school has also been disrupted. And so the teachers should look out for that, how students relate to each other, how they relate to the teacher in front of them, because something we have to consider too as well, there are many students who would be entering school for the first time. There are students who would have transitioned from primary to secondary, but they'd never entered a secondary school before. And there are students who would be entering school at the infant level for the very first time. So those kinds of incremental introduction has to happen as well. And I imagine it will come out in your essay. You will see it. You will see measures of fear and being intimidated by the space and so on. You know, I was talking to a young student not too long ago, and I asked, "Are you excited about the return to school?" And she said, "No." I asked her, "How do you feel about school reopening in April?" And she said she felt happy, and almost on the same breath she said, "But scared." you know, and so students are returning with mixed emotions about this thing that is being, and education has been something that is done to them, you know, so they enter the classroom with that, you know, intimidated already. But and the COVID has shown us that education is not something that is done to you. It is something that you expose yourself to, you open yourself to, you know. And so those kinds of relearning and unlearning of some of the things that we've taken for granted and some of the definitions that we've used and use them in spite of, not because they work, but in spite of. Those are some of the things I think that the teacher in the classroom has to consider.
And part of the reason I ask is because I have the personal experience of one person saying that they're almost ready to make that transition to secondary school, so they don't feel the need to have to go to this primary school where they're not going to be around these people for so long anyhow, before they have to go and get a new set of people that they're engaging with, a new set of friends, so they could, for their part, they could just stay home.
Yeah.
So that's and literally. That's,
and when we talk flexibility, are we giving parents those options? You know, it is mandatory that you send your children to school. The law states that. So you have to send your children to school up to a certain age. But are we going to be flexible? When I say are we, I mean the administrators and, you know, these powers that be. Are we going to allow people that flexibility? And the homeschooling, that may come up as well. Parents may opt to do that. But strengthening the homeschool bond, I think that has to also happen. Recognizing that educating this child is a partnership between myself as a teacher and the parents. And so the homeschool bond has to be strengthened because people will, in fact, want to take that option. I want to stay home and continue my education at home. So that homeschool bond has to be strengthened.
All right, so we're getting ready to, I think we're actually ready for the minister. The minister is ready to address. So we throw to that conversation, or we throw to the presser now, and we return with more. Stay tuned.
Division, other members of the ministry staff, members of the media, good day to you and our viewing audience on TTT, TV6, and CNC3. My name is Rodel Philip Simmons, Communications Manager for the Ministry of Education and your moderator for this morning's press conference. Welcome to today's media briefing at the head offices of the Ministry of Education. Today, our Ministers of Education, along with the executive of the ministry, will provide an update on preparations for the full reopening of face-to-face classes in Term 3, 2021-2022 for all students. My introduction is very short. I will first introduce the Honourable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, Minister of Education, to deliver opening remarks, and she will be followed by the Permanent Secretary, Honourable T. Simmons, who will provide an overview of the phased school reopening in Trinidad and Tobago from 2021 February to April 2022, when all schools will reopen to physical classes. The PS will then introduce the other members of the executive to provide the updates for their division. Honourable Minister.
Thank you very much, Rhoda. Good afternoon to the members of our viewing and listening audiences and to the members of the media who are with us and the various staff members of the Ministry of Education who will speak to the national public very soon. March 2020 will go down in global history. That month marked the full closure of schools in 150 countries and the partial closure of schools in 10 countries. Another 10 countries kept their schools fully open. By September of 2020, 100 countries opened schools fully, while 50 opened schools partially and 25 kept their schools fully shut. By September 2021, there were only 6 countries where schools remained largely closed. In Trinidad and Tobago, schools closed fully on March 16, 2020, for 1 week in the first instance. That 1 week stretched to almost 1 year. The next time students entered the physical classroom in February 2021. An estimated 35,000 Forms 4 to 6 students came out to complete preparations for their CXC examinations in June-July 2021. On October 4, 2021, vaccinated students of Forms 4 to 6 were considered the most protected from exposure to COVID-19, and these students came out to physical school. On October 25, 2021, all students of Forms 4 to 6 were brought out to physical classes. This arrangement continued into Term 2 of academic year 2021-22, and in February 2022, students of Forms 1 to 3 were brought out on a rotational basis, while students of Standard 5 entered the physical classroom for the first time in almost 2 years. At this time globally, there are only 6 countries which have kept schools fully closed. Trinidad and Tobago has used a careful and measured approach to physical school reopening, and based on the advice from the officials of the Ministry of Health, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has taken the decision to fully reopen all schools at the ECCE, primary, secondary and tertiary levels from April 19, 2022, which is Term 3 of academic year 2021-22. Present at today's briefing are various members of staff of the Ministry of Education, along with our Minister of Education, Minister Lisa Morris-Julian, and our staff is led by the PS, who will briefly elaborate on measures in place for COVID-19 management in schools, physical school operations in Term 3 of academic year 2021-22 for primary and secondary schools. Minister Morris-Julian will speak to the operations of ECCE centres in Term 3, curriculum adjustments and teacher resources, mental preparation of our students for their full return to physical school, infrastructure repairs to schools, and readiness for SEA examinations. I now turn you over to P.S. Simmons.
Dr. the Honourable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, Minister of Education, the Honourable Lisa Morris-Julian, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, members of the Executive of the Ministry of Education, other staff members, viewing public, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. As you are aware, in-person classes for students at all levels ceased on March 16, 2020, due to the threat posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Since that time, the Ministry of Education has been in constant communication and consultation with our many stakeholders to determine the most appropriate strategies for the continuation of education for our nation's students. With their support, and in accordance with the health and safety protocols provided by the Ministry of Health, schools were able to accommodate limited student attendance on a phased basis for instruction, and all national examinations were successfully held, so much so that the 2022 SEA will be held on March 13th. That is this coming Thursday. As we prepare, my apologies. As we prepare for all students to return to regular classes for Term 3 of the current academic year, I thank the ministers, my colleague Permanent Secretary, Mr. Kurt Meyer, the senior officials of the ministry, and of course our stakeholders, who together have brought us to this juncture. It was a difficult journey in uncharted waters, but we stepped up to the challenge with commitment and a sense of urgency. And today I'm proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with this dedicated team to welcome all our students at all levels, including the tertiary sector, back to school. I have with me here key members of the executive team who will outline the systems and procedures in place to ensure the safety of staff and students at all of our nation's schools. The Honourable Lisa Morris-Julian, Minister of State in the Ministry, will speak to the operations of early childhood care and education centres. Mr. Kurt Meyer, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, will outline the status of school infrastructural repairs and the provision of furniture in schools. Ms. Lisa Henry-David, our Acting Chief Education Officer, along with our Education District Health Nurse, Ms. Sylvia Douglas, of the Education District Health Services Unit, will speak to health and safety protocols in schools. Ms. Joy Griffith, Acting Director of School Supervision and Management Division, will provide information on school operations for Term 3. Ms. Anna Singh, Director of the Curriculum Planning and Development Division, will provide details on curriculum adjustments and teacher resources provided to assist schools in mitigating students' learning loss that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Judy Sipasad, Senior Guidance Officer in the Student Support Services Division, will give details on the programs in place for the psychological and emotional preparation of students for their return to physical schooling. And finally, Mr. Mervyn Sambucharan, Director of the Division of Education, Research and Evaluation, will outline the Ministry's state of readiness for the upcoming SEA, which is guarded for March 31st, 2022. At this point, I hand you over to Mrs. Lisa Henry-David, our Acting Chief Education Officer.
Dr. the Honourable Nyan Gadsby-Dolly, Minister of Education, the Honourable Lisa Morris-Julian, Minister in the Ministry of Education, Mrs. Leno Batiste Simmons, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Mr. Kurt Meyer, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Education, colleagues in education, members of the media, members of the viewing public, good day. The Ministry of Education will provide relevant information on the health and safety protocols in place at schools. COVID-19 management in schools will continue to be monitored by the staff of the Education District Health Unit, headed by Dr. Amanda Solomon and staffed by a current complement of 18 nurses. The Ministry of Education has provided guidelines for all staff and students, as well as visitors to school compounds, who must adhere to the following. 1, mandatory wearing of masks, the exception being our early childhood care and education students. 2, temperature check at entry points. 3, hand washing at stations at schools' entrances, as well as at strategic points throughout the school's compound. And 4, the use of hand sanitizers. In support of this, the Ministry of Education has ensured that schools are supplied with the necessary cleaning solutions and sanitizers, and have designated quarantine areas for staff and students who may display flu-like symptoms. The enhanced cleaning regimen instituted by the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited will remain in force. You are asked to note that schools have been practicing these protocols since February of 2021, when students first re-entered the physical classroom, and we will reinforce the non-sharing of materials such as books, stationery, food, drinks, and snacks, as well as sanitizers and other personal items among or between students. Furthermore, the Ministry of Education has developed detailed protocols for the management of COVID-19 cases in public schools, which all our principals have access to. Schools will continue to encourage all students through the use of signage and announcements at assembly and break times to walk with a personal supply of sanitizer and or hand soap, as well as replacement masks, wash their hands frequently with soap and water, cough and sneeze into the sleeves or elbows or into a tissue which is to be immediately discarded, stay at home if experiencing flu-like symptoms, and maintain their personal space as much as possible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. As you would have heard, all students in the ECCE, primary, and secondary schools are required to attend school physically in Term 3, beginning on Tuesday, 19th of April, 2022. With respect to the school operations for Term 3, all ECCE, primary, and secondary school students will attend school every day. No rotational schedules will be operated. Subject and class timetabling will revert to normal pre-COVID-19 working hours for secondary and primary schools. Pre-recorded daily reminders of safety protocols will be broadcast over the school's PA systems at least 5 times daily. That is, during the morning assembly, the morning break, at the start and end of lunch break, and at school dismissal. Whole school assemblies and breaks will be allowed. As is usual, a supervision roster will be implemented to ensure that students are supervised in the classroom during class time. Where possible, prefect, staff, security patrols should be in place during break and lunch periods to ensure that there is conformity to recommended health and safety protocols. Additionally, the schools would have the necessary signage to remind students on safe practices to minimize the spread of the COVID-19 virus. The Ministry of Education is cognizant of the economic challenges experienced by some parents. As such, schools are mandated to relax uniform requirements for students according to the principal's advice to parents. Parents are asked to cooperate with the school-specific guidelines issued by principals. Principals must ensure that lines of communication remain open with parents to foster good relations as we safeguard the well-being of their children and their charges. All in-school and inter-school sport and extracurricular activity are to resume. School feeding and school transport, which have been operating in reduced capacities, will resume fully. Data is already being captured at schools to accommodate as far as possible an April 19th, 2022 start. Thank you.
Various steps to protect our most vulnerable students and to ensure continued teaching and learning. The health and safety of our children remains our utmost priority, and every decision we make is rooted in the fundamental commitment to safeguard our children's well-being. Therefore, I am pleased to announce the physical reopening of ECC centers with effect from April the 19th, 2022. 1, we will have a back-to-school orientation. A back-to-school orientation is planned for all staff, parents, and children. The staff sessions takes place on April 1st, 2022, where there will be a reinforcement of all health and safety protocols and the risk management policy identified for potential risk and the controls needed to reduce or eliminate it. The week of 11th to the 14th, 2022, will be for the parents to ensure the smooth transition from the home to the ECCE and to allay any fears related to health and safety to all users, visitors to the ECCE centers. Parents will be introduced to the daily operations at the center. With regards to our children, continuous support will be given to the children in managing this transition to ECCE physically. April the 19th to the 29th, 2022 will be dedicated to trust-building exercises with children and their teachers in the ECCE environment. 2, center readiness. All ECC centers have been visited and assessed by personnel from our Education District Health Services Unit. sanitization of centers ongoing with cleaners assigned to each center, installation of standing thermometers and sanitizing stations at all centers, delivery of adequate cleaning and sanitizing materials, masks, and social distancing markers and posters at all centers, and their repairs ongoing at different centers. Curriculum delivery. The bubble approach will be used daily at the ECC level. This means the same group of children and staff will be together in the center, and their interaction and contact with other bubbles will be restricted as much as possible. All materials and spaces are carefully labeled to support and retain the bubble approach to staff and children during their interactions. Administrators and staff have been working assiduously in preparing the ECC environment for the April 19th physical reopening. As Minister in the Ministry of Education, I would just like to state that I have a toddler, a 3-year-old, and I look forward as we continue this physical reopening of the education system to our little ones. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. So, with continued measures to ensure the safety of all children within the ECC level, upon entry daily, children and their parents, they will be greeted by members of staff, where temperature checks will be taken, after which, once the temperature is within normal range, children will be escorted to their various bubble, where they will remain for the entire day. Materials are identified with children's name on it, and those are the materials that will be interacted with by the children while at the center daily. After each use, materials will be thoroughly sanitized in preparation for next use. At the end of each day, once more, persons coming in to collect children will be checked, temperatures will be checked. Once temperature was within the normal range, persons will be allowed onto the compound to collect children. If the temperature is not within the correct range, persons will be allowed to wait in a safe area for approximately 5 minutes, after which the temperature will be rechecked. If for some reason or the other the temperature is not within the reading, parents will be contacted to collect their children as opposed to the person who would have come in to pick up their children.
Good afternoon to all present and the viewing audience. Information on curriculum adjustments and teacher resources to assist with mitigating learning loss are provided as follows. The Ministry of Education, Trinidad and Tobago has approached the issue of mitigating against learning loss consistent with international best practices and in alignment with the CARICOM OECS model for learning recovery and enhanced program known as Let's Read. Thus, to support principals and teachers, the optimal learning guidelines prepared for both primary and secondary schools elaborate on how to diagnose learning gaps or deficiencies, adapt the curriculum to ensure the minimum outcomes for each learning level are covered, and utilize authentic and differentiated strategies for instructing students. Recommendations to both teachers and parents derived from the national diagnostics conducted for mathematics and English language arts with both primary and secondary students have been disseminated through the ministry's social media platforms and its website. The diagnostic tests were administered by teachers to all students in October 2021, both in physical and virtual modalities. Principals and their middle managers have been provided instruments to effectively monitor and support their teachers through class checks and clinical supervision. resources for learning in the form of videos, radio and TV broadcasts, newspaper pullouts, PowerPoints, and learning activities placed on the Student Learning Management System, known as the SLMS, have been catalogued and shared in a digital format to all schools and teachers via email. Videos and links to key resources can also be found on the ministry's website under the heading Resources by clicking on the drop list titled Curriculum Resources. All parents are encouraged to familiarize themselves with the guidelines and resources the ministry has provided to support student remediation, intervention, and accelerated learning. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. The programs in place for mental preparation of students for return to physical school. Student Support Services Division will be focusing on transition and debriefing through both group and individual delivery. The topics include knowing your school community, becoming familiar with the physical plant and environment, identifying school personnel and the different levels of schooling. This will be done through group sessions, adjusting to changes, learning about the school community and the different personnel, identifying persons who we can go to for assistance, supporting children through change, helping students and parents adjust to physical school and learning strategies to reduce anxiety in students and parents or guardians, identifying and practicing appropriate classroom behaviors, positive and acceptable behaviors and practices, learning how to get along with others in a school setting, identifying qualities of positive friendships and communication, debriefing the home school experience, exploring the emotions expressed during the pandemic and the physical reopening of school. The framework for delivery would be group and individual sessions. Group sessions, 6 sessions daily, 30 minutes each. The number of participants will be 20 per group. And individual sessions, referrals to be completed for students who appear to be displaying signs and symptoms of distress due to the experience. Individual counseling will be delivered upon receipt of referrals. Small group sessions with students on understanding health and well-being during COVID, coping mechanism on mental health issues, positive and negative ways of dealing with mental health issues. Positive would include outdoor activities, communicating with family members. Negative would be the drug use. Anxiety in dealing and interacting at the social setting. The impact of catching COVID and how it affects the family unit. Small group grief and loss sessions for students who have experienced different types of losses. What is grief and loss? The stages of grief and loss, and strategies for coping with grief and loss. Teacher information sessions would include signs and symptoms of stress in student population. Parenting and education, for parents to understand their own mental health, coping with stresses, understanding how to manage their own mental health and their family life, understanding children's mental health and learning how to cope, how and when to ask for help, and where do you go for help. Other topics may include, but not limited to, grief and loss, emotional intelligence, substance abuse. Topics may vary based on the school needs assessment. Understanding that the students do not exist in a vacuum, teacher information sessions and parent education sessions will be conducted in accordance with the topics identified for student intervention. So teachers and parents will increase their capacity to further support students at school and at home. Thank you.
Good day. For fiscal 2021 to 2022, the Ministry of Education has conducted repairs at approximately 198 schools, primary, secondary, and ECC centers. In addition to this, we have targeted 61 primary schools for emergency repairs for the SCA exams. These jobs are washrooms, lights, ventilation issues. They're all been awarded and are scheduled to be completed on or before March the 30th. We are partnering with our TNTech and WASA to ensure an adequate supply of water and power on the day of the exam itself. And our crews are on standby to deal with any emergencies that take place over the next 2 days. With respect to furniture delivery, we have delivered furniture to more than 50 primary and secondary schools, and this project is ongoing. With respect to the CAPE 2022 exam, we have targeted 81 projects in various secondary schools that will be completed before the CAPE exam. Thank you.
Pleasant good afternoon. One of the most important events of the primary school calendar is the taking of the secondary entrance assessment examination. This year, the examination is scheduled for March 31st, 2022, and it is scheduled to begin at 8:30 a.m. Candidates sitting this examination will be required to take part and demonstrate their competency in 3 specific subject categories: an essay component, the English language arts writing, a mathematics component, and the English language arts grammar mechanics section. The exam is scheduled to run for approximately 3 hours and 20 minutes. There are approximately 552 examination centers, from which our 19,198 students come from. That is broken down into 9,904 boys and 9,294 girls. Tobago has a registered candidate listing of 986, while Trinidad has 18,212 candidates registered. There are tremendous arrangements to be put in place for the undertaking of the assessment. We started this exercise way back in September of 2021. In leading up to Thursday's assessment, the Ministry of Education has delivered principal packages comprising of admission slips, student concession approvals, of which 436 students have been granted approvals in Trinidad, while there are only 4 students in Tobago receiving such concessions. Scripts for all the examination centers will be sent on the morning of the examination. Tobago has already received their complement. Trinidad has theirs already, and packaging has been prepared for all our 552 centers. The districts, 7 in Trinidad and Tobago as one entity, will be managed by school supervisors. They will be taking receipt of all the examination material very early in the morning, so it's a very early start for our colleagues at the School Supervision Division. In order to efficiently run an examination for 19,000 plus students, we do incorporate the services of our many principals and teachers alike, and they all play critical roles in this exercise. They serve as center managers, they serve as assessment supervisors, and they serve as testers. This year, we anticipate 3,400 approximately teachers and principals will be engaged in supporting the efforts of the Ministry of Education in ensuring that a standardized approach to the invigilation of the exercise goes smoothly. Training for this complement of teachers and principals took place over a week of very detailed explanation and clarification, the use of the assessment manuals and its many forms in terms of the data to be recorded and supplied back to the ministry that speaks towards the administration of the exam. It's very useful that we have this data ongoing. Packages for all our assessment personnel has been delivered as well, and they would have contained the attendance registers, the students' labels, the forms, the approval for concessions for both parents, teachers, and students. Each essay invigilation team will be required to meet tomorrow, Tuesday, the 29th of March at 8:30 a.m. at the respective assigned examination center. It is akin to a dress rehearsal for all players to be mindful of their assignment, the complement of students assigned to them, and all the procedures and practice to follow, especially for students receiving concessions. They will also be looking at the physical layout of the school, the preparation of the seating arrangements, and as you are well aware, students have already been in school, already having a first-hand experience of the upcoming exam for Thursday. So it should not be an unfamiliar situation for any of the nation's children, where it has to deal with the students and their seating and their timing. Teachers have been working very diligently with their candidates to ensure that all of these understandings are well entrenched. The meeting is also intended to go over the standardized requirements, make sure that the administration manual will be followed in terms of the time of the exams, the order of the assessment, all important, and to make sure that students are very much in line with all of those. There will also be opportunity for both assessment staff and the center managers, which in this case are the principals who play this role, to go over their COVID-19 safety protocols, which students and schools have already been engaged. So it is not an unfamiliar territory in terms of the entry protocols, the wearing of the mask, the sanitization. All of those concepts will be rigidly enhanced for the assessment on Thursday. As a precaution, we also work with the TNTech, the WASA public utilities, to ensure that there is no undue failure in those with those utilities. So in order to assist any principal on the day should any unnecessary thing crop up, they have been provided with contact numbers in order to alert members of the utility to the particular position should anything arise. We have been working every year with these two utilities, and they have provided ample service during this time. So we don't anticipate any untowards problems. As a part of the Ministry of Education thrust to review and renew and improve on our processes, there's a monitoring exercise that takes place as well, whereby Ministry of Education staff will be visiting the centers to conduct observation and recording of data, among other things, to ensure that the examination would have been implemented smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all our contributors, Mr. Morris-Julian and PS and the rest of the team. I want at this time, in closing, to thank our stakeholders, including the THA, for their willingness to partner, innovate, consult, make recommendations for this transition back to the physical classroom. It's been a process. I want to note specifically that we met with our stakeholders all along, and most recently, as we discussed, this full return to school. Unfortunately, we were not able to meet with tutor on the assigned date because tutor was not able to meet, but we are in communication with them and will meet with them before school reopens. Detailed guidelines will be prepared and sent, as usual, to our principals via the required circular memorandum, and it will be publicized as is normal on our website so that all parents and students can be familiar. One point to note is that teachers will not be mandated, as they have not been, to provide synchronous online classes to students who are not in school. Of course, this returns to the pre-COVID situation where principals make decisions on the basis of students' absence and they make arrangements with teachers for this. However, in terms of students being offered online instruction as an option, that will not be mandated by the Ministry of Education. With the full return to physical school, all students are expected to come out to school. I want to thank our parents and our students. It's been a very rough time, and they have really done human service. They have been able to adapt, and I want to thank them for their efforts in these past 2 years. I want to thank our teachers and our principals who have really stood up to the test and ensured that we are able to offer educational continuity to all of our students. I want to also thank all school personnel, our security officers, our health and safety officers, our civil staff, those who work in the offices, in the labs, our technicians, our OJTs, who are very important as a part of our school system, our BOAs, who help in the offices, and our janitorial staff. I want to give a special thank you to those supporting staff, because at this time their roles were very, very critical, and in many cases they were the ones supporting the return of our students to the school, so I want to thank them very much for that effort. The staff of the Ministry of Education, Minister Morris-Julian, and all of our staff led by our PSs. There was a lot of adaptation necessary during this time, a lot of that innovation, creativity, hard work beyond the usual hours, and our staff was always willing. We see represented here heads of divisions, and they have been leading their staff to do the needful, so I want to thank the staff of the ministry. Our stakeholders, and I want to include with our stakeholders our usual wider stakeholder group who meet with us from time to time, very willing and able to offer recommendations, suggestions and assistance. I want to thank them for their support during this time. The country has needed that support and they have given it. I want to also thank our partners MTS, who have been very instrumental in both conducting our school repairs as well as performing janitorial and security services in many of our schools. I want to thank MTS especially, and our other security and janitorial companies who also supply support to our schools. I want to thank them for that. School feeding, PTSC, of course, those are two very important services in terms of school feeding and transport. I want to thank them for their willingness to work with us, the drivers who have been working with us, the caterers who have been working with us in difficult times. I want to thank them for that. And of course, WASA and TNTech for always being there to respond to our different needs. We thank those utility companies. I want to thank also the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health on behalf of all parents, including myself and Mr. Morris-Julian, who do have children in the school system that have been affected by this. I want to thank them for the guidance and guiding Trinidad and Tobago to this point, where we can reach here to say that on April 19th, we look forward to bringing our children out to school. The effect of our children not being in school cannot be overstated. It has been a very difficult time, and so we are very happy to be at this point, based on our COVID management strategy for the country, to be able to announce this. I want to remind us all, however, that we are still in a pandemic, and therefore all of the arrangements you have heard espoused by different members of our education team, all of these arrangements are projected. However, this holds as our health situation holds. And if there is advice on the Ministry of Health that we have to make any adjustments or arrangements, that will be done, as has been seen in our experience over the past 2 years. Certainly, we do not hope or anticipate that that will take place. But these are pandemic times, and one thing COVID-19 has taught us is that we cannot expect things to remain the same. We have to expect the unexpected. And so, as we have been doing, we will adjust as necessary if that becomes necessary. So, we've come to the end of our conference, and so I hand you back to our Communications Director.
Members of the media, we now go to the question section of the press conference. I'm going to ask each media house to ask one question each round. Please state your name and the media house you represent. And once we've covered the first round, we will come back to you for your second question. So, who will be first?
Good morning, everyone. Rihanna McKenzie from Newsday. Someone mentioned addressing the learning gaps. I wanted a little bit more detail on that, if you can, given it's been 2 years since so many of these students have even seen a physical classroom, especially at the ECCE level. There has been some concern with that, especially as it relates to social development. So can anyone expand on how that in particular will be dealt with?
Good morning. Since the closure of school in March of 2020, what the Curriculum Division has done is has provided support in terms of guidelines, initially guidelines for online learning, as well as exemplars of instructional materials for students. These materials have been in the form of videos. We've had radio and TV broadcasts. We have created learning activities, and these have been to support our teachers as they continued instructing students on the online modality. And then as we progressed, what we did is we created what we call an adapted optimal learning guideline. In these guidelines, we have emphasized the minimum outcomes for every level, every subject, from Infant 1 to Form 3. The CXC is responsible for the syllabus for Form 4 to Form 6, and essentially in 2021, they did provide, by way of a handbook of topics, support to students so that they would be able to focus on particular areas. No curriculum has been contracted or reduced. What we have done is we have supported our students and our teachers to be able to cover the minimum outcomes, knowing that in different circumstances, more coverage can be accomplished. The essential of this approach is to ensure that every student is equipped with a program of learning that is consistent. It scaffolds from concept to concept so that they can develop foundations, the basic competencies to be able to move into the next level of learning. And at the same time, teachers are guided on remediation. They are also guided on how to accelerate learning, how to adapt the curriculum to make sure that students are able to complete the syllabus, the curriculum, as best as possible, but to be able to attain the minimum outcomes, as I said, and be able to be well prepared for the national and regional examinations.
I'll ask the ECCE Director to just speak briefly on ECCE.
Good afternoon again. So during the time of remote learning, what we did, we continued providing developmentally appropriate activities for children at the ECCE level. So on a weekly basis, we produce the Ecc Activity Pack, and that pack was loaded with fun-filled interactive activities for parents, guardians to continue working with their children at home. because at the ECC level, children learn through active engagement and involvement. So these activities were geared towards. We know that they are very resilient beings, and as such, the activities provided in the weekly activity pack, the radio programs, 3 times per day, 5 days per week, as well as our YouTube channel and our web quest, they ensured continued learning and development during this time.
Second question.
Okay, just to clarify again with regards to social distancing, just to be clear, is it that the previous COVID-19 measures no longer apply, or is it that the other COVID-19 measures are meant to compensate for the lack of social distancing that will happen when everyone is back out to school?
The entry protocols are being kept, hand washing. Students are being reminded to keep their personal space. Students are being reminded to wash their hands, wear their masks, sanitize while they are at the school compound. And so this is what we are asking parents to also encourage students and remind them of how they live safely in the pandemic, not necessarily just in the school environment, but this is how they will have to live safely in the pandemic as the country is reopening. So we expect that students will be able to take that on board and follow the protocols to minimize the spread of COVID-19 within the school environment.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Jesse Ramdev from CNC 3 News here. I know a lot was articulated about the measures and policies for the reopening of schools, right, Minister? Perhaps you may want to deal with it directly or redirect it to someone else, but the issue of school violence and the reports that we've gotten and the incidents that we've been able to corroborate, right? What steps, I know there would have been a meeting recently with the Ministry of Security and whatnot. What would have come out of that meeting and what measures would be in place to ensure or to mitigate these recurrences from taking place?
So we have met as the Ministry of Education with the Ministry of Youth Development, Ministry of National Security, and included in that second meeting, we've met twice, and in the second meeting, we also included Ministry of Gender and Child Affairs. So we've met with those various ministers and their teams twice, and we have another meeting that's planned for next week. So it's at 2-week intervals, and by next week, what we will have is a rubric for school violence. We do have one at the Ministry of Education, but we are going to revise that rubric and have that as a platform for discussion with the formal involvement now of the other ministries and agencies. What obtained before is that we had a document that dealt with the Ministry of Education interventions through student support. What we require is intervention and assistance from outside of the Ministry of Education. We require the services of youth development in terms of the MyLAT program and how that can be amended to add support to our students who need that extra support and cannot find it in the school environment and demonstrate by their behavior that they cannot find that support in the school environment. We also need the intervention of social development and family services in a formal way to deal where our school social workers end, where their remit ends. We need social work to intervene in a special way there, and we need a formal mechanism for that, because as much as our school social workers can do home visits and so on, they are limited in their reach. And so we need that extra intervention in a formal way. We need our families, the families to be dealt with, because school violence is not, it doesn't originate many times at the school. It comes from many times communities, the children need extra help and so on. So we are formally asking for that assistance with family counseling and also socioeconomic support for the families where that is required. That is outside of the remit of the Ministry of Education, and we need that input formally. With respect to the community police, again, we do have relationships with them. They do operate in schools, but we need to formalize this so that we understand exactly where they can intervene to assist in our schools and our students. The emphasis is not penalizing students. It's on giving them the support that is required. And some of them will need support outside of the school system. So we are working to provide our stakeholders in our next meeting, which comes up next week, provide them with that amended rubric, which involves them specifically, and it shows them exactly where we expect their intervention. And once they are on board with that and they give their recommendations and so on, we will meet with our stakeholders, our wider stakeholders, to show them exactly what we intend to do. And then we will go to Cabinet, because we will need Cabinet's approval on this expanded school infraction type rubric. And that is when we'll be at the point to say, okay, this is what we are doing. Because in some cases, if we have repeat offenders, and we have identified the repeat offenders by school, by name, we know who they are. And if we cannot get our parents, those parents, and those children to conform to the usual school environment in the way that we expect, well, then we will have to do something different to offer more support to those students in an environment that they will respond to. And so that's why we are involving Ministry of Gender Affairs and Child Affairs, because we may need the intervention of the Children's Authority and so on. So that is where we are. We meet again next week, and we formalize this process because we want to be able to offer our students that support, and we want to be able to ensure that our school environment is conducive to teaching and learning, and our teachers and our students and all school personnel feel safe in their surroundings.
Minister, on the point of school social workers, are they adequately resourced, in your opinion, or do you think there's need for more at this point in time?
There's always need for more. But we have to understand what is practical and reasonable. What we're also finding is that where there is a failing on behalf of the family structure, and sometimes even the church structure would have provided support, where there is not that support anymore. What is happening is that more and more students are coming to school needing that level of support. But we simply cannot keep adding and adding and adding personnel to deal with what we see as a symptom. We have to attack the root, and that is why we are pulling in resources that already exist from the wider government, because certainly we have over 500 personnel in that division. How many more are you going to add? When you do that, then the issue of management of a division becomes really a critical point. So we are not seeking to keep adding plasters to the sore that exists. We are seeking to address the root cause, because there are some systems also that are supposed to operate in a classroom that are not operating, where teachers are to identify at a school level the students that need support early on, and therefore they can be dealt with at an early stage rather than a late stage where the problem presents itself and gets into the media. So addressing also the system that is supposed to exist at a school, that school-based management system, it does have measures to deal with students early on, and we need to get that operational, provide enough support to our teachers at that point, monitor that that is happening. Because if we do not address things early, they become bigger problems at the end, and we simply cannot keep adding personnel and adding personnel and adding personnel. We need to take a careful look at, are we really addressing the issues that our students need to have addressed? So we are taking that approach. At the same time, we have reached out to PMCD at Public Admin to look at our structure for student support, look at the caseload to determine if we need, how many more we need, and if we can afford to add on all of those personnel. We're also looking at redesignating our staff at student support and ensuring that the schools who need it the most, and we know those schools, ensuring that those schools are adequately resourced, and where we don't have too many issues, where schools have support from outside sources, we can dedicate the resources more to those that need it. In addition to that, we are also going to reach out through Adopt a School, asking for corporate entities, NGOs, and some of them already do this, to exist, who exist and who will want to interact in our schools to give us that support at the level of the school. So whereas we saw corporate Trinidad and Tobago, we were very grateful for the interaction and their intervention with devices, we also now need that intervention with respect to services and mental preparation, support at our schools for our students. And so that's going to be a critical need. So we are attacking it at many fronts, not simply just adding more personnel into student support. We want to know how much more exactly, and PMCD and public admin will help with that. But we're also looking at using the existing resources of the government and also refining the processes at the ministry level and at the school level that are supposed to operate to identify these problems early on so that they don't become huge problems later in the students' school life.
Do we have any more questions? Jesse.
Minister, I know in closing you mentioned it, and you would have alluded to it in the past as well, but when it comes to students with comorbidities and students who are suffering from various ailments and aren't able to return to physical classrooms, what provisions, if any, may be in place for them? How do you treat with those students?
At this point in time, all students, once school opens physically, all students are expected to attend. On a regular basis, pre-COVID, principals would take into account students who cannot attend school for some reason, and they would work with teachers to provide support to students. That is not out of the question, but the question really is, which student and what medical basis can we apply to say this student cannot come out to school? And that is really an uncertainty that cannot be catered for at this point in time. Yes, we are looking forward to the opening of an online school which will provide support for continuation classes and so on, but that is in its nascent stages. We've just gotten on in the ministry, our director and much of the staff of our educational technology unit, and they will be tasked with doing that on our school learning management system. It was not possible before this. We did not have the personnel, the manpower to be able to.
Introducing NLCB's multiplier trio of games. That's 3 games that can multiply your winnings by 10, 20, or 50 times. The multiplier X effect gives you the chance to win up to $800,000 and over $17.5 million in prizes. Here's how. Purchase all 3 tickets valued at $10, $20, and $50. Scratch the gold coins to reveal each ticket's winning numbers. Then, scratch the dollar bills, revealing prize numbers, and simply match any of your numbers to any of the winning numbers to win the prize for that number. It's as simple as that. A 5x symbol will multiply your prize, shown by 5 times. 10x symbol will multiply your prize 10 times. 20x symbol will multiply your prize 20 times. And 50x symbol will multiply your prize 50 times. Play NLCB's new multiplier trio of games today and scratch your way to over $17.5 million in prizes. Players must be 18 years and older. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to this afternoon's Playway Pick 2 and Pick 4 draw, supervised by independent auditors KPMG and presided over by the National Lotteries Control Board. Good luck, everyone.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the NLCB's Playway Pick 2 and Pick 4 draw for Monday, March 28, 2022. Players, to keep safe, we urge you to continue wearing your mask, fill out your bet slips, and remember you can advance wager for all draws. First, we'll draw this afternoon's Playway number. And the winning number is 26. The lucky mark is foul. That number again is 26. Our Mega Mix machine now has a Mega Bonus Ball in each chamber where you can win more Mega for your money. Should a Mega Bonus Ball call, you can win $35. If a Mega Ball calls, $75, a Mega Ultra Ball calls, $100, and should a Mega Extreme Ball call, you can win $125. Players, remember, Mega options cost an additional $1. And now for our Mega selection.